The American dream was supposed to be for everyone. But on the afternoon of September 25, 1978, in the affluent suburb of Beverly Hills, California, Bob Marley would discover that some dreams came with an unspoken color requirement. When a racist real estate agent tried to steer Bob away from the neighborhood where he wanted to raise his family, Bob would do something that had never been done before: turn house hunting into a peaceful revolution, one song at a time. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell because we uncover the hidden gems that shape the legends we know today. Beverly Hills, California, 1:30 p.m. Bob Marley sat in the passenger seat of a rented car, studying the address written on a piece of paper. Beside him, his wife Rita adjusted their infant son Damien in her arms, while their other children, Ziggy, Stephen, and Sharon, peered excitedly out the back windows at the beautiful neighborhoods rolling past. Bob had been searching for a family home for months. The success of the Exodus album had brought financial security he'd never experienced, and for the first time in his life, he could afford to buy his family the kind of home he'd dreamed about during his childhood in the poverty of Trenchtown. He'd seen the listing in the newspaper: a 4-bedroom house with a large backyard, good schools nearby, a safe neighborhood where his children could play without fear. The address was in Beverly Hills, an area known for its elegant homes and established families. Their appointment was with Douglas Whitfield, a 52-year-old real estate agent who had been selling high-end properties in Beverly Hills for over 15 years. Whitfield prided himself on understanding the character of different neighborhoods and matching clients with homes that fit their lifestyle and background. When Bob's manager had called to schedule the appointment, he'd only given Bob's name without mentioning who he was. Whitfield assumed he was dealing with another entertainment industry client, probably a record producer or studio musician looking to upgrade. Whitfield was waiting outside the house when the Marley family arrived. The moment he saw Bob step out of the car, dreadlocks flowing, casual clothes, unmistakably Jamaican, his expression changed completely. "Mr. Marley?" Whitfield asked, his voice already taking on a cooler tone. "Yes," Bob replied warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting us. This is my wife Rita and our children." Whitfield shook Bob's hand reluctantly, his eyes scanning the family with obvious disapproval. "I have to be honest with you, Mr. Marley," Whitfield said before they'd even looked at the house. "I don't think this property is quite right for you." Bob looked confused. "We haven't even seen it yet." "Well, that's true, but I've been in this business for 15 years, and I have a sense of what works for different types of families." Rita felt Bob's body tense beside her. She knew that tone, knew what types meant. "What type of family do you think we are?" Bob asked quietly. Whitfield realized he needed to be more careful. "I just mean that this neighborhood has a very specific culture, very established families, very traditional values. People might feel more comfortable in areas that are more suited to their background." Bob's children were listening to this exchange with growing confusion. Ziggy, who was 10 years old, tugged on his father's shirt. "Daddy, why can't we see the house?" Whitfield's discomfort increased. "Perhaps I could show you some other properties. There are some lovely homes in more appropriate areas." "More appropriate for who?" Bob's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it. "For families like yours, people with your cultural background." Bob looked at the house they'd come to see. It was beautiful, exactly what he'd imagined for his family. Large windows, a well-maintained garden, the kind of stable, peaceful environment where children could grow up safely. "Mr. Whitfield," What do you know about my cultural background? Whitfield shifted uncomfortably. I just think you'd be happier somewhere that feels more like home. This is America. America is my home. My children are American citizens. Why wouldn't we be happy here? It's not about legal rights, Whitfield said, his patience wearing thin. It's about fitting in. These neighbors have certain expectations about the kinds of people who live here. Rita stepped forward, holding Damien closer. And what kind of people do they expect? People who share their values, people who won't disrupt the community character. Bob was quiet for a long moment, looking at his children, at his wife, at the house that represented everything he'd worked toward. Mr. Whitfield, I want to see this house. I really don't think. I want to see the house I came here to see. The house that was advertised as available. The house I can afford to buy for my family. Whitfield looked around nervously. They were standing on a residential street where several neighbors could see them. The last thing he wanted was a scene. Fine, he said curtly. But I'm telling you, this isn't going to work out. The house tour was a disaster. Whitfield rushed them through each room, pointing out problems that didn't exist, emphasizing the high property taxes, the strict neighborhood association rules, the challenges of fitting in with the established community. But Bob's children loved the house. Ziggy was already planning which room would be his. Sharon was excited about the large backyard. Stephen was asking about the good schools nearby. Daddy, can we live here? Sharon asked innocently. Before Bob could answer, Whitfield interjected. I'm afraid this house isn't really suitable for your family. Why not? Ziggy asked directly. Whitfield looked uncomfortable having to explain his prejudice to a child. It's complicated. Sometimes different types of families fit better in different neighborhoods. Rita had heard enough. What you're saying is that black families don't belong in this neighborhood. I never said that. You didn't have to, Bob said quietly. But you've made your position very clear. Whitfield's mask of professionalism finally dropped completely. Look, I'm trying to save you from embarrassment. These people aren't going to accept you here. Your music, your lifestyle, your fine appearance. It's going to cause problems. Problems for who? For everyone. For you, for your family, for the neighbors who have to live next to you. Bob was quiet for another long moment. Then he made a decision that would shock everyone present. Children, he said to his family, wait for me in the car, please. Rita looked at him with concern. Bob, what are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time for a different kind of conversation. Once his family was in the car, Bob turned to Whitfield. You said the neighbors wouldn't accept us here. That's right. Let's find out. Before Whitfield could ask what he meant, Bob walked to the middle of the front lawn, sat down cross-legged on the grass, and pulled out the acoustic guitar he always carried in the car. What are you doing? Whitfield asked in alarm. Bob began tuning his guitar. I'm introducing myself to the neighborhood. You can't just sit on someone's lawn and play music. It's not someone's lawn. According to your listing, it's potentially my lawn. Bob began playing Three Little Birds, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet residential street. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing gonna be all right. Whitfield was panicking. You need to stop this. You're going to cause a disturbance. But Bob continued singing, his voice growing stronger. Rise up this morning, smiled with the risin' sun, three little birds, pitch by my doorstep, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true. Windows began opening across the street. Neighbors stepped onto their porches to see what was happening. At first, they looked confused. A Jamaican man with dreadlocks sitting on the lawn singing reggae music wasn't something they saw every day in Beverly Hills. But something magical began to happen. Children started appearing at windows, drawn by the music. A few neighbors walked closer to listen. The melody was infectious, the message hopeful, and Bob's voice was simply beautiful. Whitfield was mortified. "Please stop. You're making a scene." Bob looked up at him calmly. "I'm making music. Music is about bringing people together, not keeping them apart." An elderly woman from across the street, Mrs. Henderson, walked over to the edge of her driveway. "Excuse me," she called out. "Are you Bob Marley?" Bob stopped playing and smiled. "Yes, ma'am." "I have your records. My granddaughter plays them all the time. What are you doing here?" "I was hoping to buy this house for my family, but Mr. Whitfield here seems to think we wouldn't be welcome in the neighborhood." Mrs. Henderson looked at Whitfield with surprise. "Why would you think that?" Whitfield was speechless, caught between his assumptions and the reality of a neighbor who clearly didn't share his prejudices. More neighbors were gathering now. A young father with 2 small children, an older couple walking their dog, a teenager who had recognized Bob's music from down the street. "Would you play another song?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "My husband fought in World War II. He always said music was what kept him hopeful during the hard times." Bob began playing One Love, and something extraordinary happened. The small crowd of neighbors began swaying to the rhythm. Some were humming along. Children were dancing on their parents' feet. One love, one heart. Let's get together and feel all right. Hear the children crying. One love. Hear the children crying. One heart. Saying, "Give thanks and praise to the Lord, and I will feel all right." When the song ended, applause broke out across the street. Bob had transformed a potential confrontation into an impromptu community concert. The young father approached Bob. "I'm Mike Rodriguez. My wife and I moved here last year. We'd love to have neighbors who bring this kind of positive energy to the community." "I'm Bob Marley. This is my family," Bob said, gesturing to Rita and the children who had gotten out of the car to watch. "We know who you are," Mike's wife said, joining them. "Our kids love your music. You'd be wonderful neighbors." Whitfield watched in disbelief as his carefully maintained assumptions crumbled before his eyes. These weren't the racist neighbors he'd assumed would reject the Marley family. These were people who appreciated good music, kind families, and positive energy. Mrs. Henderson walked up to Whitfield. "Douglas, why would you think we wouldn't want the Marleys as neighbors?" Whitfield stammered. "I just thought, sometimes there are cultural differences." "The only cultural difference I see," said the elderly man walking the dog, "is that they brought beautiful music to our street and you tried to keep them away." Bob stood up, guitar in hand, and addressed the growing crowd of neighbors. "But there might be issues with financing, with the neighborhood association," Whitfield said weakly. "What issues?" Mike asked. "If they can afford the house and want to live here, what's the problem?" Whitfield realized he was trapped by his own prejudices in front of a community that clearly didn't share them. Bob approached him calmly. "Mr. Whitfield, what if I told you that all I want is to provide a good home for my family? That I want my children to grow up in a safe, beautiful neighborhood where they can make friends and go to good schools?" That's what every parent wants," Whitfield admitted. "Then why are you trying to stop me from achieving the same dream that brought every other family to this neighborhood?" Whitfield looked around at the faces of the neighbors. People he'd worked with for years, people whose homes he'd sold, people whose trust he valued. This is perfect, Rita said, standing in the kitchen where she could imagine preparing meals for her family. The backyard is big enough for the children to play, Bob observed, and quiet enough for me to write music. You write music at home? Mrs. Henderson asked. Music comes from life, from family, from the peace you find in your own space. That would be wonderful, Mike said. Our kids could grow up listening to new Bob Marley songs being created right next door. By the end of the tour, it was clear that the Marleys had found their home, and the neighborhood had found new friends. Whitfield pulled Bob aside privately. Mr. Marley, I owe you an apology. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. You and your family would be wonderful additions to this community. Thank you for saying that, Bob replied. But more importantly, thank you for being willing to change your mind. How do I make sure I don't make the same mistake again? Bob thought for a moment. Remember that the American dream doesn't have a color. Every family seeking a good home for their children deserves the same respect, the same opportunity, the same chance to build something beautiful. The Marley family bought the house